We're about to do a panel talk with the artist from the Indigenous show and our juror, Jodi Yellowfish. So I was just going to introduce her and then we'll get started. So I'm going to just read Jodi's bio. So Jodi Voice Yellowfish is Muskogee Creek, Oglala, Lakota, and Cherokee. Born and raised in Dallas, Texas. Jodi is a product of the U.S. government's relocation program. She attended Haskell Indian Nations University in Lawrence, Kansas, where she received an associate's degree in social work and studied for her bachelor's degree in Indigenous and American Indian Studies. Jodi is one of the founders and the chair of MMIW Texas, Rematriate, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, and on the steering committee for the Dallas Truth Racial Healing Transformation, and is the commissioner on the Arts and Culture Advisory Commission for the City of Dallas. She is also a wife and an adoptive parent. So please join me in welcoming Jodi Yellowfish and our artist. We might start by just having all of the artists say their name, so we can put a face to your name.
Good. Hello, everybody. My name is Matthew Sanchez.
Joe Eckert.
Catherine Kanai.
Andres Hernandez.
So I just go right into it? Okay. Okay, so again, I'm Jodi Voice Yellowfish. So I'm really honored to have been asked to participate in this and to be in the space with everyone tonight. And you'll have to excuse me. I'm more kind of nursing a sore throat, sort of. So got a cough drop in my mouth, but So I always state that I don't feel like I'm an artist. I don't all of this stuff, but I've come to understand why I feel like that, and it's about my culture, and I feel like there's not a difference between what we create as what people call art and what is an extension of ourselves and our culture. I do beadwork. We help with regalia and our families, things like that, and I don't call that art. It's my culture, and so I always grapple with that. And I've been very privileged to be in spaces like this, in different art spaces, and even as much as I say I'm not, I am always pulled back into these spaces. I mean, it's been a decade of I get invited to these spaces, and it's a space that is truly special when you get into a space where you highlight and uplift art and artists. And so with how I wanted to open too, I wanted to address how some of the conversations this week regarding the number of submissions and things like that, and what came up through these issues. There was a low submission number, but I didn't expect a lot of submissions, honestly. I've talked with some of the organizers and things like that, and I felt honoring that there wasn't a lot of submissions was very important, to not try to dismiss that or try to hide that fact. I felt like that really opened the door for a lot of very needed and healthy conversations, so that the collective and the community can learn from that as well. That you can learn that it's a lot to say you're American Indian, you're Native, or you identify as Indigenous. It's a lot for people. When you identify as these things, you are going to be questioned. I identify American Indian. I know my tribes, I know how I'm connected, I know my descendancy, things like that. But I also know that we have a lot of colonized factors that dictate our reality and who we are. We have to deal with things like blood quantum and citizenship, and literally you can compare it to like a pedigree of a dog, what we have to do to identify as such. I don't know anybody else in the world that has to identify with these parameters and these critiques of who you are, all the while ignoring the violent colonization that got you to this point. And so these things really dictate how not only we connect, but why and how we are disconnected, and how we are in this time, this movement of this reclamation of who we are. And I think that is the most important thing to come out of this show, is understanding that there are generations of people trying to heal, and out of that healing comes their reclamation, and them being okay, not only proud, but being okay to say that you are Native, that you are descendant of this tribe, that you are indigenous. And in Texas, you know, I do work with missing and murdered indigenous people, and we use indigenous because it's encompassing of everyone. You know, we can't just say American Indian, because that would envelop just tribal citizens, people that have their established tribal community that's recognized by the federal government. That's not the case for everybody, especially in Texas. Texas is very unique in that we're so close to our relatives that are on the other side of this non-existent border. This doesn't mean that they are not indigenous, because, you know, the governments that dictated their survival refused to acknowledge who they were. And it's up to all of us, especially in these art spaces, to acknowledge that all of that is going to make these spaces a little scary, you know, bring up some fears, bring up, am I going to get called out on something? Am I going to do this right? I haven't had the chance to have these conversations, so I'm really appreciative of that. I'm really appreciative that these conversations can be had, and that this collective is setting the bar for the community, you know, for the art community here in Dallas, because I haven't had that chance yet. You know, I get asked to speak at the Nasher. I get asked to help the DMA with a land acknowledgement. But what else? You know, can I, you know, where is something that I create? Do I feel comfortable with putting what I create in that space? And I haven't yet. I haven't felt that yet. And so I feel that, I see her getting emotional. I truly believe in, like, you don't cry alone. So that's how I always feel. But that's what art does. You know, it's an extension of yourself, and yourself includes everyone behind you. You know, I grew up knowing, like, you can face anything because you're not alone. You walk with your ancestors. You do everything with who made you who you are. And so to be in a space where your art feels safe is really important, really new, I feel like. And I feel like being asked to be like a commissioner with the city, to be in these spaces, I question everything. I ask people if they know about being a relocation city. I ask if they knew about all of this stuff. Everyone in the city, you know, often doesn't. I'd say 99% of the time, nobody knows what I'm talking about. But that's why I'm there. That's why I feel like I'm doing my part in understanding and helping uplift art in that way. I tell people often that these art spaces aren't for me. I don't feel like I should be there. I don't feel like I should be at the Nasher or the DMA or whatever space here, but because conversations like this aren't happening. Conversations around how you identify, you know, is descendancy going to be enough? You know, do you have to provide a tribal citizenship card? And what that means to ask somebody and deny somebody. You know, these are definitely conversations that have not been happening. So I think everyone in the collective and everybody here is very fortunate, very lucky to be a part of the conversations and what's going to come out of this exhibit. And, but I do want to remind people too, like, conversations surrounding identity, especially or specifically, being Native, tribal, indigenous, they aren't always the most fun and most happy things. They bring up a lot. Indigenous people usually bring a lot of trauma into what they do, and I think that's what makes the artwork that comes from Native people, indigenous people, that much more sacred, because, like I said, they create with ancestors, helping them do this work. So yeah, I wanted to make sure all of these things were touched upon before we get to hear from the collective and the artists about, what brought them to not only create, but what made them make the brave decision to submit and say that they're indigenous, and how that makes them and the people surrounding them, confront what is indigenous. What does it mean, and how does the art world and spaces need to shift things to make those people feel welcome. There are a lot of little things that I've mentioned in the past few days, this past week, having chats with folks that help this gallery, and it's things that I was like, I've never been asked that. I've never been able to tell somebody about alcohol or the space or the timing or what you're asking of people. So I'm very thankful to have been asked to participate, and I'm very excited to hear from everyone that created it to share with everybody tonight. Thank you.
So how do we want to approach the festival table? Do we want to have each artist speak a little bit about their work and what brought them to making the decision?
Yeah, I think that's perfect.
Awesome. Yeah.
Okay. I guess I'll start. I was in this gallery before, so I followed the gallery on Instagram, and I was scrolling on my feed one day and I saw the poster for Indigenous Art Show. I finally saw something. I was like, okay, that directly speaks to me, because usually I'll go to art galleries and it's like a BIPOC art gallery, and I see plenty of the B, plenty of the POC, but I never really saw the Indigenous, the I, and the BIPOC. So I was like, oh, okay, something specific towards us. So I was like, cool. And a lot of my work back there, I have a lot of my work back here, and obviously a lot of it you can see a lot of indigenous themes. And one of the recurring themes in my work is a chief by the name of Kawana Parker. And for those who don't know, Kawana Parker was known as the last free Comanche chief, and that's my tribal association is Comanche. He was known as the last free Comanche chief because, after that, preservations and all that stuff. But I resonated with him specifically because as someone who's mixed indigenous, seeing him, because not a lot of people know, but he was half white. His mom was a white woman, his dad was an indigenous man. So seeing him being like such a profound chief, but he was mixed, that was something that really spoke to me, because I was mixed. I was always, never thought I was indigenous enough, never thought I was Mexican enough, because I'm also Mexican. I don't speak Spanish, and they're like, oh, you're not Mexican enough. Or I don't know my indigenous language or a lot of my indigenous dances or anything like that, so I'm not native enough. So I was always kind of in the middle, never really knew where I belonged. But obviously as I grew up, I was just like, whatever, I know who I am. I know I'm indigenous, I'm Mexican, I'm Comanche, I know this. And I don't have to keep telling people. But I saw this show, I saw that it was specifically for indigenous people, and I just knew I had to sign up, throw in a lot of my most indigenous work in there. Another thing that is a recurring theme in my work is my color palette. My favorite colors to use are red, yellow, and blue. Like, so if you see those like saw blade pieces back there, you see a lot of red, yellow, blue. And if you're an artist, you might think, oh, the primary colors. But no, those are the colors of the Comanche flag. So I like to throw in those colors a lot just to kind of, represent my tribe a little bit. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
Hi, I'm Joe. I actually decided to enter this show because the price was reduced, and I thought, well, maybe they're not getting the kind of voice that they want from a very centralized, Native American voice. So I just told myself, maybe there are some voices on the outskirts here that might not be from a culturally identifiable or a racially identifiable source. And, I just decided to apply. I grew up in Oklahoma, which is 40% reservation. And, I actually have a good amount of Cherokee blood. I wouldn't say that I identify culturally as Native American or in any way would want to take a voice away from somebody that's sitting next to me. But I think that my work is informed by the way that I was raised, and my father being 1/16, my grandfather being 1/8, my great grandfather being, it just kind of, we always had a lot of pride surrounding, I think, having some roots in the origins of the country, and in the way that I remember feeling very proud of that as a kid, just being able to identify with that. And so I'm not here to give a big speech, or I wanted people to see my art in a way that it would relate to them regionally. I'm a Southern artist. The work that I create identifies with what's happening with issues in the South. And I think that you might see some themes in there that would make sense with that. And so, again, I'm not gonna give a big speech, but thank you so much for considering me in this, and I appreciate it.
I'm Catherine, and I also saw the information on Instagram and decided to enter because I have a connection through my mother's side of the family who immigrated and settled in Mexico. And when my mom's family came up from there, at that time, it wasn't really acceptable to be an immigrant or whatever. So it was kind of just smoothed over, and they weren't allowed to speak Spanish. And so, my upbringing was as an Anglo. And I really did not realize for a long time I had any connection to any other heritage than that. And that my mom came from a time where that was kind of the idea, is everybody just wanted to blend in. They didn't want to accentuate people's differences. And so that was just kind of buried a little bit. But in my own work, the emphasis for me is more on human emotions that we all have, and complications in life and events in life that pull at us. So I've been making art a long time, and I like the expressiveness of it. I like to combine different images, and I hope to appeal to the nature that we all have, and the desires we all have in life, and the intensities and the emotions that we all feel. And so that's more the way I approach my art. Thank you.
Andrew. So I was actually pushed onto a show from some members of this collective. I think being such is because I am a lost cause, and by what I mean from that is that I agree with Jodi about what she said about us being colonized throughout the years or generations. So since I've been invited, it's kind of been embedded in my mind about how we each lost ourselves throughout each generation. I didn't know I was fourth generation American until the other day. I don't speak my native tongue. I'm frowned upon by my own people. And any roots I have of my elders, they're gone because my grandparents died when my parents were young. And my parents don't know their own grandparents because they died young as well. So now I'm basically lost as an individual, and anything I have from back then to discuss with y'all tonight. So I mean, it can be a double-edged sword to where I really can't explain too much about my past due to such causes of maybe it's perhaps because I became a product throughout what my parents wanted to live, what my parents, my grandparents, and before them to live this American dream of making it in America. And so I really can't say too much as I've mentioned, but since I became part of such, I do want to find out more about myself, as I want to break that cycle for my future generation to know who we are as a people and to remember that and hopefully carry that on. I won't talk too much about my art because I feel like it's not too much tonight what that's about, the message. But I'm glad to be a part of such, and thank you for having me.
Are there any questions that y'all have for the artist or the juror about the show, the artworks?
I have a question, maybe not in particular about the art, but in the Black community we have a lot of the same conversations about like who qualifies and like using this pseudoscientific nomenclature of ordained or worth or how much you need to be to claim and phenotypically what you look like. And I heard you mention that we are so far behind of like understanding what colonization really did to people of color. And so these conversations are rarely had. So how do we have these good faith conversations about who gets to show up into certain spaces and claim certain identities, while also not dismissing anyone, but also not dismissing like the violence of this colonization, like holding space for both of those things. Like how do we start to actually have these conversations? It's a really popular topic with our community to like account for stuff.
I mean, of course, that's really loaded question, loaded topic, but I mean, it's really about, I feel like, at the core of whoever is bringing these people together, like what is the one, you know? Is it to and with especially with like art spaces too, it's just like it's never been this highlight the individual and how they create, you know, why are they creating, right? But outside of that, I feel it's really like it's a matter of understanding the history, like understanding the community, understanding where they're from, understanding what got them to that point where you're willing to discuss who you are. Yeah, because it's really what somebody is ready to talk about. Some people just they're not prepared to talk, confronting history is traumatic in itself. It's like if we live in a country where we don't know the true history of how this country came to be is never talked about. So generations of people have been taught not to talk about it. And I feel like there's finally communities where there's people finally willing to talk about it, and they're okay with talking. They understand. I feel like that even within my family and my community, and I say that I'm a product of the relocation program because I am. Both of my mother and my father came to Dallas because Dallas is a relocation site. They came on that program, and my dad still refers to back home. Like if he's gonna one day, he's in his 70s, he's not moving back to Oklahoma. That's not happening right now. And I was born here. I don't have that connection to my ancestral homelands or to my tribal community in that way. I know my people. I'm connected in that way. I can go and return, but that's not home. Home is here. So it's like I feel like this generation of people that are like, I'm a parent now. I feel like the parents that have like young kids today, we're the ones that have been given the opportunity to talk about that. And I feel like a lot of that can come up in like how you live and how you want to teach the next generation, how you want to teach your kids. I feel like that's really an important thing to be able to talk about. Because I didn't have my parents or my older sisters or anything like that teach me how to sing, how to dance, how to do these things. I went and found it myself. I went to make those connections. Then my family came together about those things. And now, like, my children are active, and they I see myself so much in how they navigate the world and school and their spaces. So I feel like that's a way to have those conversations, is how you're working to change the future for them. Yeah.
You said something about who do we accept whenever it's such a muddy situation. For me, at least, I always look at the intention. For example, growing up, I've had plenty of people. I tell them I'm Native, and then they'll tell me, "Oh, I'm Native too." But you weren't Native last week. When we were talking about it. They just got their 23andMe results came back, and they found out they were 1/32nd Navajo or whatever. Now they're Native. Now they're wearing all the turquoise and all the beads and all that stuff, trying to be different. And I feel like it's the same way in the Black community. I bet there's plenty of folks who take their 23andMe, find out they're 10% West African, and then oh, now I can say the African. You know what I mean?
Because it's different with us darker skin, whatever spectrum in the darker skin. I don't have to. No one is asking me, "Are you Black?" Right? But there's a kind of, I guess, how are we grappling with people that are able to step in and step out of it because they're racially perceived as
One thing.
yeah, and not. I feel like it's delicate still, but
That's a very good point, because a lot of people will look at me or one of my brothers. We're more darker skinned. We have dark hair, and we tell them, "Oh, we're Native," and they're like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense." But I have another brother back there who's lighter skinned, lighter hair, a little bit lighter eyes. He'll tell people, I'm Native too, and they're like, "No, get out of here." But we're full on blood brothers. You know what I mean? So it's a very delicate situation. It's very muddy. But like I said, it's all about intention for me. You know what I mean? There was a period of time where I didn't even tell people I was Native, because when I was in 7th grade, I told I think a history teacher, we're learning about Plains Indian, we're learning about Comanches, Apaches, and I just kind of told her, "Oh, my grandma's Comanche," or whatever. And she made me stand up in class and was like, "Hey guys, we have one," basically. And then 2 weeks later, they started pulling me from my reading classes so I can sit in with all the other indigenous kids at the school and kind of take an Indian class. So they pulled me and my twin brother out once a week out of our reading class to basically just sit in a room with all the other Indians and look at this other big old, like, we didn't even learn anything. We were just kind of like almost alienated off, kind of tossed away. So it's kind of again, it's a weird situation. So it's weird to like remember that I went through stuff like that, but then there's kids who just found out that they're 1/32 Blackfoot, and now they're like trying to kind of rip off the culture. You know what I mean? Especially whenever someone who's actually indigenous doesn't even feel comfortable to say.
Yeah, like safe is a good way to say that, because it's in fashion to be indigenous. It's in fashion to be native, and it's not always, and especially with the work that I do with dealing with MMIP situations. We have to unpack a lot of history to understand why we still have this crisis that we're dealing with, right? Like we have these unprecedented numbers of violence and murder and things like that against us, and we have to talk about the reality of the history that it was violent. And colonization didn't have an end date, so the violence has just changed over time, and it can be making it unsafe to say that you are, and it's like we can be in spaces where people have kind of romanticized what it means to be Native, to be indigenous and to identify Native. It's like that means you understand that, every household has some kind of trauma. You're bringing all of this to every space that you are, and that you could have Native parents, they could be tribal citizens, but blood quantum dictates that that you can't get your tribal citizenship. That's a real thing. It's like I have my CDIV card, but it was held to try to get my citizenship. Why? Doesn't make sense. And it's like these weird little things dictate who you are and what make you feel okay to say that you are. So I think you have to be willing to understand colonization is alive and well, and it's dictating my reality of who I am and how I say who I am. And that crosses into every community, and not just identifying as Native, but there is a whole thing to unpack, because we do have to deal with blood quantum and citizenship in a way that I don't know anybody else that has to. I have yet to meet anybody that has to do that. The only people I've ever met that has some kind of card are Palestinian people. When I was there, and we were showing each other our cards. Like that is the only other place in the world that I have seen that, and that says a lot, I think.
Great. Do we have someone else have a question? Any other questions?
I have a question. So I really liked what you were saying, how you incorporate, when you first were talking, how you incorporate the Comanche flag into your art, and how that represents you and your identity, and how you're navigating that throughout your art. And I was wondering if any of the other artists could kind of talk about how they are navigating their identities, and the complexities of what it means to be Indigenous. And I also would like to say, I'm really happy to see the word Indigenous, because I consider it a global term, because I'm American Indian, but I'm also I have Quechua family, and that's the Indigenous people from South America. But then what you're saying also with Palestine, I consider that an Indigenous group as well. So I was wondering if y'all could speak to how y'all are navigating that through y'all's art, or maybe not, and kind of doing this counteraction of not including that, and why, if you are comfortable speaking about that.
I can take a couple more points. For me, whenever I've been doing art since I was a little kid, since elementary school, and that's right around the time whenever I was really starting to put two and two together that I was Indigenous. Because again, my mom is the Indigenous one, and she never talked about it growing up. For example, my grandma, her parents were from the reservation. right? And my grandma's mom, was in a re-education school, I believe it's called. It was a Catholic one, and so they were trying to teach Catholicism to Indian kids, and they would like ferociously like hit her whenever she would write with her left hand because it was demonic. So it's safe to say we're not Catholic anymore. But yeah, I've been doing art since I was very, very young. I really didn't even start to incorporate any indigenous factors until I was in high school, because that's right around the time when I started feeling a little bit better and a little more, it was easier to talk about being indigenous. Because in middle school, that's whenever I got put in that class, so I didn't really talk about it after that. And then probably like my freshman, sophomore year of high school is whenever I kind of worked back into it. But it was actually after high school, after I graduated, that I really started incorporating more indigenous ties into my work. Like most of this stuff I have back here is from after high school. Well, this is more recent work. And I like doing this kind of stuff because it gives me a reason to look up the culture even more. So I'm learning not only about my culture, but more about other different indigenous tribes. Like I have a piece back here. It's called the Yaqui Deer Dancer, and you can see it's a man with a deer headdress on his head, and that's an indigenous tribe in Mexico. You know what I mean? So, like you were saying with the word indigenous, that's what I go by because I'm also Mexican. So it's kind of like a wide net term to incorporate everyone with indigenous descent. You know, a lot of people try to think of Indians as just the people from America, like America,
Right.
but they don't incorporate Mexico. They don't incorporate the indigenous people, Canada, the First Nations, Inuit, Inuk, people like that. And it also, like you said, it incorporates, people from all over the world, people from South America, people like the Maori people from New Zealand. So that's what I go by, but that's why I like doing this kind of work, because it gives me another reason to do more history and look up more stuff about indigenous cultures. So, but that's me. Yeah.
Anybody else?
I'll speak to that a little bit. My ex-wife is 75% Hispanic, and so like speaking like from that angle, I think that when I was listening, being married for 8 years to that culture, their grandparents taught their children not to speak Spanish. My ex-wife did not speak Spanish, and my daughter, who's probably 40% Hispanic, does not speak Spanish. And so I think that that's kind of what culture does to people, is it tends to homogenize them and then kind of rob them of a history when everybody's trying to get along. And so, I made it a point this year. I'm in a class at ACC, a Spanish class, just to kind of try and learn that, and encouraging my daughter to get involved in some of that stuff, just to kind of have a connection to her heritage in a way that we all, I think, want to. I don't think that people should get into homogenized culture. I think it's important that we all kind of branch out into our own little specialized pieces of who we are. And again, not trying to say that I would identify with any of these things, but having been kind of a hub of things that are happening around me, I want to participate in it too.
Are there any other questions before we wrap up?
Hi, everybody. So, my name is Jamelia. I'm one of the 500 ex-members. I just want you guys to know that 500 X has been intentional with making a safe space and for all artists, but we have been intentional. A couple of years ago, we did have a BIPOC show, and I didn't like it. There's that. And I want to tell you why. I don't have an issue with the term BIPOC because I understand that people are just trying to, hey, this is who we're focusing or whatever. But what tends to happen with BIPOC shows is it's like, okay, all you colored people come over here, you know, and you get munched in. And that is not informative for some of our peers that maybe need to be educated on some things. And I suggested, we're a democratic society, 500 exits, and I suggested that we meet up a bit. And I want you to know that's why we're having this show. And we're going to continue forward with that. So when we say BIPOC shows, it's going to be specific to something, you know, specific to a culture so that they can feel celebrated and people can come and celebrate with them and learn more. So I just kind of wanted you guys to know, like, this show was intentional, and we aim to do good in the Dallas arts community, and we are being intentional about this.
Well, I just wanted to thank all of you for being here tonight, and for all the artists and Jodi for talking about the show and the work. We really are thankful to have all of you in the space, and super grateful. Jodi, thank you for your show. I hope you all have a great night, and please feel free to talk to any of the 500X members, the artists, if you have any other questions. But thank y'all for being here.